Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Barbecue Talk. On today's video, we talk about cooking brisket in your backyard. In today's Barbecue Talk, we're talking to another subscriber. We're talking to Dan, who just kind of emailed me out of the blue and just kind of asked me if I could talk to him about certain questions he had on brisket. A lot of the questions that he was asking are similar questions that I receive on Instagram and on YouTube comments and things like that. So I decided we should set up a time to chat and really kind of talk through these questions. So without getting in too much, this is my conversation with Dan about talking about cooking brisket in the backyard. Okay, so we're here with Dan. So you kind of emailed me a little bit, and we kind of had a back and forth, and I decided to ask you, like, hey, why don't we just do a barbecue talk? Certain questions that you may have.
I appreciate you responding. I didn't expect a response, to be honest.
For people who think that I don't read emails, I read them for sure.
Right. Like everybody else, I've been cooking for a while, over 10 years, honestly. I still feel like I haven't perfected that brisket, right? So that's kind of what my questions always kind of rely on. Like on an offset that I have at home, right? I have a loaded Wichita. And what I've been doing for my brisket, I've been placing them pretty much on the top shelf near the smokestack. I just do that, I think, because it's the furthest away from the fire. Mm-hmm. But I noticed on your Kingman, I think you put them on the bottom row. What do you think is the best?
I would try to keep it towards the bottom. If the placement of the stack on the Wichita is similar to the Kingman, where like the stack isn't really all the way in the top corner, it's kind of like a pipe that has a little bit of space up top. Cooking temperature on the top rack in the top corner is hotter than the bottom. The other thing that I did with my Kingman is I took out that tuning plate. I felt like the tuning plate kind of carried too much heat towards the back. That's the only reason why I don't feel like I have to get it super far away, because I don't have that tuning plate anymore where it's just keeping everything there super hot.
That's how it keeps it pretty much even from left to right, then I'm assuming, right?
I think the idea of that tuning plate, like it makes sense in theory, because the gaps, they get larger as it goes towards the back, but because the material is such a thick metal that it just holds in so much heat. If the temperature read like 250, that tuning plate made it a lot hotter, especially towards the bottom of the cooker. And with that tuning plate, it doesn't really allow the airflow to flow naturally because it's like blocking out that front side. So a lot of your heat is just coming straight from the bottom with very little circulation up top.
Got it. I'm gonna try that out. I've never done that. So have you bought into the tallow, the tallow hype lately, right? I mean, ever since I think Jeremy Yoder brought it out. I think a lot of people have been watching it. I mean, I've been using it. I think it makes the brisket look nicer after it's, when you're wrapping it up and whatever, but I don't know if it really does anything, right? To me, I'm not saying it makes it look nice. That's
sure. Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because that's really the reason how Jeremy and I became friends, is because of our fake YouTube drama about using tallow or not using tallow. Right. Yeah, shout out to Jeremy. Like a lot of barbecue places still use it. I mean, it's not like it's a bad thing. I just personally don't use it because I don't think it's that necessary. It's not that it's not good. It's just not what I'm looking for. I'd rather have a brisket that has a little more texture on the outside. Dousing it in tallow after it's done cooking, it kind of like, you work so hard to build texture on the exterior. When you're talking about bark, we're looking for kind of like a dried out surface where the meat or the fat like combines with the seasoning. And you still kind of get that, but when you put so much tallow on top of it, you kind of dilute the effects of that. And I think that also when people do that, they don't take into account that when you add more fat to your cook, even if it's at the very end, you have to have more seasoning to kind of balance it out. And so I feel like there are a lot of times where I've heard people say like that they've gone through all these different things. They trimmed it right, they seasoned it, they put mustard on it, they did salt, pepper, and Lowry's, and then they did foil tips, they spritz it, blah, 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 blah. And then they say they wrap that thing in tallow, and then they put tallow on top of it again. Like, they do everything that, kind of checks the box. But then they always say that it's like, it doesn't taste as like smoky, or it doesn't taste as seasoned as I want it to. I personally think it has to do with the fact that when you add that extra fat, you have to have extra seasoning to it to kind of balance it out.
For sure, yeah, because we work so hard on these cooks, right? We're smoking for hours, and then, the bark is finally set, and we're putting that tallow. Like I said, I've done it, and I think that's probably why I feel like sometimes my the flavor's gone, right? Because I'm not one of these, and this is actually going to lead into one of my questions. When you do your briskets, are you really only using salt and pepper, and are they really only using salt and pepper? It seems like it's a little bland, right? Not bland. I mean, salt and pepper go well together, right? But I do like to add other things. I do add the paprika. I do garlic powder. so many more things, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I always usually just tell people to start with it. If you start with the salt and pepper, it kind of gives you a better idea if you want to add other like garlic powder or onion powder to it. You kind of know how much more you need to add based off of your ratio of your salt and pepper. It's one of those things where you have like a sauce recipe or you have a rub recipe and you just replicate it. And when you know it's like not quite right, or it's like a little bit too salty or not salty enough, or a sauce that's too sweet or not sweet enough, you haven't played around with the base of it first to really figure out what part do you really have to like bring down or what thing you have to bring up to balance it out. For me, like I always just kind of start with like 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt, depending on the type of salt that you're using. For example, I just did a beef rib cook earlier where I started with that base and I just added some garlic powder to it because I just wanted to add something different. I don't think it's like you're wrong for adding anything else different to the rub. I don't think it becomes any less Texas barbecue just because you decide to put something else in it.
Is there a specific secret? Like you've got your 1,000-gallon that you've made so much food on. You use your backyard cookers. Do you feel like you can, on your backyard cooker, put out the same kind of barbecue you can on your 1,000-gallon, right? What's the secret to try to get that brisket moist from end to end?
A secret would probably be just doing a lot more cooks. Same type of cooker and the same with the same cut of meat. Brisket is definitely the hardest one for sure. I wouldn't say there is like a secret. I think it's really about knowing how hot your cooker actually is. I've said a lot of times that I don't really change the way that I cook, whether I'm cooking a 1,000-gallon pit, a 500, or my backyard pit. It's more so trying to understand like how hot a certain temperature is that, like, let's say on my 1,000-gallon, 275 on that, because it has to travel such a long distance. Yeah, the temperature might be accurate, but the fact that it's so close or so much further away to the heat source, it's a little less dramatic. But if I was 275 within my backyard pit, that 275 is probably a little bit more aggressive than it would be on like a very long, like 1,000-gallon pit where there's a lot of space. There's just a lot of factors what has to do with like how much space you have around it, how aggressive is your fire. Like it's kind of hard to do in a backyard pit, but a lot of times I would have our guys open up like the door of our 1,000-gallon and I would tell them, feel the heat against your forearm that you're holding up there. Like, do you feel like it's really aggressive, or it's warm, or is it like hair dryer, like a lot of hot air is kind of pulling through? And I think that has to do with, your draw of your pit, but also how big you're building your fire, because the bigger your fire is, the more oxygen it has to have in order to fully draw through the entire smoker. And so I feel like a lot of people tend to build these really large fires in their small firebox, and it has to have a certain amount of air to like pull it all the way through. And that's the thing that kind of causes a lot of problems, because like, 275, but 275 in that small pit with a really large fire with a lot of draw, there's just so much convection that goes on there that you build color really quickly before like it gets to the point where you should go to wrap. And I feel like a lot of people wrap too early because of that.
Of course, that makes sense.
Yeah, probably 3 key critical moments in terms of getting a brisket really right. 1 is a trim. 2 is getting to the point where the brisket is ready to wrap if you decide to do so. And 3 is knowing when to pull it out. Attribute most of the problem to being they don't know when to pull a brisket. It's too tight. The fatty end is almost too gone. It's like cooked too much while the lean isn't there yet. I think that to me attributes to wrapping too early or too late. Because I think most people they've heard a lot of key things that they need to do before they get into wrap. And usually it's about once you get past 160 or 165, it's ready to wrap, and that's not really true. There have been times where my brisket has been at like 175 or 180, 185, where my point still feels pretty good and doesn't feel like it's gone too far. And one of the checks that I used to do, and this is easier to do when you are cooking like 30 briskets in a 1,000-gallon pit compared to 1 brisket in a backyard pit, I would look for how much grease and water is actually dripping into the like grease pan at the bottom, because that's when you're able to see like, oh, my briskets are starting to render. They're starting to like kind of like cook down a little bit. And so that was always a sign to me that like, okay, we're getting close. And now once it starts to slow down the trickle of all that fat, now it's like, it's kind of getting close to being ready to wrap. I mean, that's like one of like 7 or 8 checks that like we would have just to get ready for briskets to be wrapped up.
All right. So when it comes to choosing a prime and a choice brisket, I think I noticed you were maybe cooking on a choice before in one of the videos. Which one do you choose and why? Or, is it what's readily available?
For me, the thing that's most important is like, especially when I'm buying a bunch for a pop-up, I just want briskets that are going to be like uniform in size and shape. For example, if I'm at Costco, the choice there is terrible. They're always way too big or way too small. The primes are generally pretty good. So the last time I went to a purveyor, and that's the one where I got a bunch of choice briskets. And there were some prime there. It wasn't that much more expensive, but I personally just love the size of the choice briskets to kind of start with. And just kind of going through the cases, like the sizes were pretty consistent all the way through. And then you always kind of have to ask the person, like, how many briskets are there in a case? And then you take that total weight, and I kind of divide it just so I can get a rough idea of how big these briskets are going to be. Because sometimes they come in these like really giant cases, and I'm like, if this is 4, I don't want to even open these. But if they say that they're 5, then it's like, okay, that's a pretty good number. You kind of always have to like figure out like where, like if you're buying in bulk, right, you have to figure out what is the average size of them. I like to open up like 1 or 2 cases if they'll allow you to kind of see how much fat that they leave on top, because at the end of the day, you don't want all your briskets to be scalped, but you also don't want briskets to have so much fat on them, because that you're paying for that cost,
No, for sure.
So to me, it really has little to do with whether I'm going with prime or choice. To me, it has to do with the size, the weight. You want them to cook as evenly as possible. You don't want one giant one that's gonna kind of slow down the cook for everything else,
So kind of jumping on that really quick, what's the actual like pound wise? A lot of the ones you did were roughly about the 9-10 pound range after trimming, I noticed.
Yeah.
I know where you want to be.
Yeah, I would say so. I think once you get to like 10 pounds or so, you can generally get them done probably within like the 13 to 14 hour mark. When you have some that like after trim are around 13 pounds, like those are the ones that kind of tend to get to your 16-hour cooks and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily bad if you have a bunch of them. You just have to know that your cooks are going to be longer, or maybe you can cook a little bit hotter because you have to get more moisture out of those bigger cuts of meat. So you just kind of like knowing what you have, it just allows you to kind of plan your cook a lot better.
Right. I think I made that mistake where I've been trying to buy really, really big briskets because the flat is a little thicker, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the smaller ones actually eat a lot better too. I always tell people too when they're trimming it, because they see how like, the thickness of a lean slice with the done cooking, but they don't realize that before we cooked it, like it's pretty thin and it will plump up a little bit. And this is a mistake I made like so many times when I was first starting off, is that I would try to get the thickness of my lean to be what I want it to be at the end, but then it just plumps up into a hockey puck and you have very little lean to slice, and that lean like slices are super tall. At that point in time, I probably left on too much fat too, because I didn't know how to trim properly, and I was worried about over seasoning such a big piece of meat that like I didn't put enough salt on there, so it was just like a very overly fatty, under seasoned, very like not good slice of lean.
Sure, everyone has that story, man. I mean, like I said, I'm still not 100% there, but I've gotten a lot better from where I started. I can definitely admit that I still need help. So,
hey, man, there's some times when I cook things too, and I'm like, I don't know if I really learned anything when I went to Texas. I was like, this is not a good brisket. It happens. All right, guys. I hopefully you enjoyed the conversation that I had with Dan. I just want to give him a huge shout out and just allowing me to record our conversation of us doing this. In terms of cooking brisket, it really just comes with time and just doing it a bunch, really learning not only the cut of meat, but also the type of cooker that you're cooking on, whether it's going to be on a Weber Smoky Mountain, whether it be on a kettle grill, on an offset, whatever it may be. So it really just takes a lot of reps to get it right. But that's also the kind of fun of barbecue, because it is kind of difficult to, do it right. The learning curve is kind of steep, but as you kind of get more details, and hopefully some of these tips will help you guys to kind of jump that curve just a little bit more. And I just wanted to add, a lot of these kind of questions that you guys do ask help a lot of people out. And it's a lot of things that I'm not sure if I should talk about, but you know, I really do enjoy talking to people who are starting to, you know, get into barbecue and answering these questions. So if you want to be featured on a barbecue talk video, comment down below. If you ask a good question, then I might contact you and we can set something up. You can also message me on Instagram at KnoxAvBarbecue. Let's continue to teach a lot of people the basics of barbecue so now we can move forward and start to push barbecue in a direction that hasn't gone before. So that's the end of this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends, and I'll see you guys in the next one.